Type Moon. One of the biggest franchises in the modern anime sphere. With help of the Fate franchise and recent localizations of its newest visual novels, Type Moon has been growing very steadily, becoming one of the largest names in the ADV game market with their connected universe in the current decade. You've probably heard of all their big hitters: Fate, Tsukihime, Karo no Kyokai, and Mahoutsukai no Yoru. The four great Type Moon works, which each helped build the overarching Nasuverse and enrich its world full of iconic characters and unique perspectives. All pieces which, mind you, I love to death. However, something about Type Moon some might not know is that they actually have a lot more Nasuverse works back in their pocket. The four I mentioned are the big ones the company focuses on. However, there are many more Type Moon works that exist which aren't brought to attention as much. Works that, honestly, are really good in their own right and deserve more love and attention. So that's what this video is about. I want to remind everyone that there is just so much more of this franchise left to explore and discuss. So today, I'm here to talk about the Type Moon works that you might not remember. And if you do, you definitely don't talk about them nearly enough. I know because I'm guilty of this too, so I'm going to fix all of that right now. This is the many forgotten works of the Nasuverse, brought to you by yours truly. So let's start with the spin-offs. Some might think that Fate, with its massive popularity, wouldn't be included here, but you'd be wrong. I'm not talking about manga like Fate Type Redline or CCC Foxtail, or even talking about obscure novel works like Fate Prototype Fragments, Fate Requiem, or Fate Lost Einerjar. Though if you haven't read any of those, you probably should. No, I'm talking about Fate School Life. You ever think about those three female side characters in Fate Stay Night? You ever thought that Himura's side story in Fate Holaraxia was great and you wanted more of her? Well, if you didn't know, they already have their comedy Yonkoma spinoff, also known as Hiro no Tenchi. This is a whole spin-off revolving around those three girls in Fate Stay Night that showcases their daily life happening concurrent to the Holy Grail War. Granted, this is not a serious story. It doesn't follow any specific route, and most of its content doesn't really connect with the Type Moon urban fantasy appeal. As a result, I do admit that School Life is the least interesting of these obscure works since it's mostly just a comedy. And out of the 15 volumes, as far as I know, only one is translated. So I don't see many people reading this anyways. But hey, it's worth mentioning for the people who do enjoy these girls whenever they appear. And hey, Ayaka's in it, so it's already the best spinoff ever. And speaking of the Sajos, while Prototype and Prototype Fragments are somewhat remembered, the same can't be said about the Fragments side story, Fate Labyrinth, which is essentially a light crossover with Monica as its main character and oh boy, I finally have to explain Labyrinth, do I? Okay. Deep breaths, here we go. Labyrinth tells the story of a Grail War that takes place in the 7th Labyrinth of Cowback Alcatraz. If you don't recognize that name, here's a quick history lesson because we'll be talking about him again in this video. So, you remember that phone guy in Carnival Phantasm and Fate Strange Fake? Yeah, that's Cowback Alcatraz. He's a dead apostle ancestor, and he makes mazes. He makes mazes so well that he made one in a pocket dimension and trapped himself inside it for the rest of his existence. Is this confusing? Oh boy, we haven't even gone to the Labyrinth shit yet because this is just Tsukihime lore. You're gonna have to bear with me here. So you know how Monica is connected to the root? Well, during the events of Prototype Fragments, she essentially projected her consciousness into the root and visits other timelines. While doing this, she ends up in the Fate Apocrypha timeline and finds herself trapped in Cowback's 7th Labyrinth. In the Apocrypha universe, I must clarify. Why is she there? Apparently there's a holy grail in that labyrinth and it summoned her, along with Saber, the Stay Night one. You still with me? Okay, because we're only halfway through the page. The premise of the Grail War is unlike any other. If most Grail Wars are battle royales, Labyrinth is a dungeon crawler, where Saber and Monica, who by the way, is also possessing another magus named Norma Goodfellow, go into this labyrinth in an attempt to reach the end to win the war and answer the mystery of what the heck is going on. On the way, they encounter various mystical enemies and other allies, including servants from other fates and Gray from Case Files who just so happen to be there. I'm gonna be real with you, Labyrinth is by far the weirdest Fate entry in my opinion, and I'm including Last Encore here. The idea on paper is pretty great. A dungeon crawler story in the Type Moon universe with light crossover elements of not just Fate, but all of Type Moon? This is basically just Trails in the Sky 3rd, the best Trails game. What could go wrong? Well, if the premise itself doesn't already seem beyond wacko, you need to remember that Labyrinth is technically a prototype fragment spin-off, which means that it was written by the same writer and translated by the same team. Now, this isn't as disorientating to understand as Fragments since it's actually told in a linear fashion this time, thank God. But with its infinitely more bizarre premise, it still ends up a pretty mind-melting experience to just comprehend on text. Granted, I also have ADHD, so your mileage may vary, but Jesus Christ, this one felt like a fever dream to read. It's a unique work if nothing else, and at least we got some adorable crossover art from it. Anyways, that's the Fate spin-off. Next is Tsukihime. Believe it or not, there are still quite a few lesser known ones. Those who are new to Tsukihime might not know that it has 2 visual novel sequels, a minor one in the form of Plus Disc and a major one in Kagetsu Tohya. Plus Disc is a fan disc that includes a short story called Alliance of Illusionary Eyes, following a relatively normal girl named Akira Seo who can see the future, and depicting her meeting with Shiki Tono. This story was initially used to reveal Shiki's design back in the day when he still didn't have one. Then there's Kagetsu Tohya, which boils down to an earlier prototype of Fate Hollow Ataraxia but with Tsukihime characters, being a primary slice of life with a few overarching mysteries. Kagetsu Tohya also included 10 side stories, all which add to the world of Tsukihime, including one written by the author of Overlord. Pretty neat. But wait, there's more. If you've been around the Tsukihime nutties enough, you may have heard of something called Tsukihime 2. This was a sequel that Type Moon had been teasing in various material books with characters and concepts being made from the original Tsukihime. It would follow the near side routes, namely Arcwade's route, where Shiki takes on the alias of Death and becomes something like Arcwade's personal knight, and teams up with a dead apostle ancestor named Enhance to put a stop to something named the Aylesbury Valesti. In a nutshell, it's basically a ritual made to resurrect one of the most powerful dead apostle ancestors and drain the world of its energy. Sadly, Tsukihime 2 has not been made yet thanks to the remake's production being greenlit to reboot the story to the new era. However, we have gotten 2 sets of side stories named Talk and Prelude which were meant to be prequels for Tsukihime 2. Talk is essentially a story following Ciel's perspective as she goes to hunt down the force of Einash, one of the dead apostle ancestors which actually appeared in the Elmaloy case files. The second story, Prelude, is a trio of short stories from the perspective of the Magus Association, the Holy Church, and individual dead apostle ancestors, all which take place before the events of Tsukihime 2. These stories show how we get various dead apostle ancestors with varying allegiances, including Merim, who worked for the church, and Enhance, who aims to massacre them all like Arcwade. If you've been interested in Tsukihime's vampires, these stories along with Tsukihime 2 are very much worth looking into, as they give really nice insight into the world of dead apostles in a way that the original Tsukihime and even the remake hint very deeply about. And surprisingly, every single one of these Tsukihime side stories, including Talk and Prelude, are translated, and you can find basically all of them from just a bit of googling. It's a good time to check them out with the advent of the remake, and with the possibility of Tsukihime 2 resurfacing, as Nasu has expressed interest as he would like to make it as a JRPG one day. Yes! Please! With the spin-offs done, now I think it's time to talk about the crossovers. Type Moon literally has own canonical trans-dimensional coffee shop known as Ananurbe. For the record, this isn't a joke thing. Ananurbe is actually canon, it's just because of what it is, all of the crossover stuff just happens to take place inside it. Okay, so everyone knows about Carnival Phantasm being the main crossover show, as it's the only animated one. However, Type Moon actually has way more crossovers that many people don't know about. First of all, did you know that Carnival Phantasm is actually an adaptation? The original material for Carnival Phantasm was actually a manga called Take Moon, made by Eri Takenashi. It was a parody manga that crossed Tsukihime and Fate together since they were the most popular Type Moon works at the time. If you ever wondered why Rakyo and Mahoyo weren't relevant to Carfan, it was simply because the manga was made before these works got revived interest. Take Moon is, for the most part, just the original manga of Carnival Phantasm, but there are a few extra skits and jokes that the anime didn't include, so it's still worth taking a look if you like that anime and want to see more Tsukihime or Fate. There's also Koha-Ace, the original joke manga drawn by Tenchi that I based my very avatar on. This is a joke manga starring Kohaku as the main host, mainly talking about Type Moon in a meta joke scenario with Akiha and Rider. It itself eventually spawned the popular Gura Gura spin-off, which involved Tenchi creating their own servants in the form of Okita and Nobunaga, and eventually down the line making their own Holy Grail War short story in the form of Fate Koha-Ace. Despite being a joke manga, Tenchi's influence on Type Moon is quite noteworthy, considering their servants were literally some of the first event servants ever included in Fate Grand Order, and the Gura Gura crossover events themselves being a yearly staple in the game as well. Next up, we got my beloved, All Around Type Moon by Bisuke. This one is a special work, as while it is another crossover manga similar to Take Moon, All Around Type Moon also includes Rakyo into the mix, and more importantly, takes itself just a bit more seriously than the other crossover works. The thing that makes All Around great is that it's written in a way that takes these characters fully seriously. While it is a lighthearted manga, All Around Type Moon feels most like the result of these characters genuinely meeting each other for the first time and becoming friends, rather than just having them make jokes through a parody. An easy way to look at it would be to think Fate Holaraxia, but as a proper crossover. All Around Type Moon even involves other recent stories at the time like Fate Zero, Fate Extra, and Prisma Ilia. At the time of its publication, this manga genuinely tried to take the reader on a journey all around Type Moon. Because of that, All Around Type Moon is my personal favorite crossover. Because, from the sole fact that it takes itself seriously, you really get to see how these characters will meet for the first time, react to each other, and eventually create bonds that span across works and universes. For example, you'll get a post-Fate Holaraxia Saber meeting Kiritsugu again, and coming to terms with her old master after her journey's ending. If you want to see genuinely heartfelt writing for your crossovers, this is that manga. This is, to date, the closest we've gotten to a true crossover for the Nasuverse, and I love it for that. Sadly, like a lot of other Type Moon works, it kind of just ended. All Around Type Moon only got a painfully short 2 volumes until they stopped making it, which is such a huge shame, as Bisuke also expressed interest in making more content with Mahoutsukai no Yoru involved. Ugh, why does everything good get taken away from us so soon? Finally, we get the big beast. Now, all of these crossovers were ultimately crossovers for a handful of series, and naturally so. The Type Moon series is just so large that even All Around Type Moon wasn't able to tackle half of the Type Moon works with how big the universe is. However, there was still one more work. One singular work that dared try to challenge that notion. One work that asked the question, what is the endgame of the Nasuverse? Oh yeah, baby! This is Chibichuki. Illustrated by Hanabana Tsubomi, Chibichuki is the Type Moon manga that dared ask the question, how many Type Moon characters can we fit in a single chapter? This is the work that actually does its best to cross over everything from Type Moon to date, including all major Type Moon works along with every single one of their spin-offs. While it doesn't include the obscure Type Moon works that I'm about to talk about later, everything that most fans have read relating to the Nasuverse likely appears in this manga, which is insane to think about. Chibichuki, in a sentence, is literally the isekai quartet of Type Moon, to the point where the manga itself is even licensed by Kadokawa. It's told in the same crossover high school setting featuring an absurdly high amount of characters, all which are bantering and having fun doing high school shenanigans while running a student council. While it's not necessarily as funny as Take Moon or as heartfelt as All Around, Chibichuki might be the best crossover from a pure crossover standpoint. It is genuinely shocking how many characters make cameos in this story. With an ongoing translation, Chibichuki is very much worth reading. If you want to get a perspective on just how big the Nasuverse really is, this manga is that insight. It's ridiculous, and I love it for that. Alright, with the crossovers covered, it's time for me to delve into works that are straight up their own thing. So brace yourself for another weird one. Cause Did you know that Shiki's cousin has their own proper Type Moon series? Let me introduce you to Hana no Miyako, a manga illustrated by Takeru Kirishima, who also made Melty Blood's manga. When I first saw it, I must admit, I thought it was another parody manga, but no, Hana no Miyako is very much not one of those. This is essentially what Prisma Ilia is to Fate Stay Night. A spin-off that focuses on an alternative version of Miyako Arima from Melty Blood, who became very jaded after Shiki left their hometown with Arcade during the events of Tsukihime 2. As such, she's now a quiet teenager who stopped socializing with others out of fear of making pointless connections, choosing to perfect her martial arts instead. The plot takes place in the Asagami Academy. No, not that Asagami. Which is a school where power reigns supreme and all disputes are solved through battles and trials of physical strength. It follows Miyako's life in the school as she tries to live a discreet life, but ends up meeting new people, including a new girl named Shiki. Yes, there's another one. And eventually, she soon gets involved with all their troubles as well. Now, first off, the elephant in the room is Hana no Miyako takes the Shiki problem and amplifies it to 11, because half of this story's cast shares names with other characters in the Nasuverse while having nothing to do with those pre-existing characters. I've already mentioned the other Shiki, but we also have an Arturia, Akiha, the school's Asagami, and so on, so on. Some of these kind of resemble their original counterparts, but to clarify, these are just references, and their actual characteristics are very different, so they should be treated as separate people entirely. Otherwise, as a story, Hana no Miyako is essentially a light-hearted battle manga. While most Type Moon works have a sense of mystery and maturity, Hana no Miyako is a lot more meatheady and fun. It's definitely worth reading, just because it's really enjoyable, but don't expect something as deep or thought-provoking as previous Type Moon works. If that sounds interesting, I say check it out. It has what is, in my opinion, the cutest Shiki. Okay, now I think it's time I talk about the big ones. Out of these, the first one we got is the big hitter most people have probably heard about. Notes. Made for a doujin anthology series named Angel Voice, Notes is one of the first Type Moon works to ever exist behind Mahoutsukai no Yoru and Kara no Kyokai. It tells a story about a dystopian future, where the planet Earth has already died. In an attempt to rid humanity of the Earth's corpse, the other celestial bodies send their types to Earth to wipe out what remains of human life. Here we follow a story of the final human being on the planet, a single man named Gun God. He lives a struggling life in this unforgiving apocalyptic world, and one day meets a strange being named Vivi, who also decides to live with him. Notes is a very short novel, only having 6.5 chapters, meaning you can literally read it in half an hour. The story itself is also very simple. However, Notes is very important mainly due to its hyper-concentrated lore. Despite being placed super far into the future of the Nasuverse, it uses many aspects that reappear in other Type Moon works, including ones that come out to this day, like the black barrel wielded by Gun God, which was created and used by Sion and Melty Blood, which very recently, we got to see it installed into Mash's Ortonax during the events of Fate Grand Order. Notes also introduced the concept of types, the most powerful beings of each celestial body, and are considered the most powerful beings in all of the Nasuverse. For Tsukihime fans, you know Arcade, right? Well, her father, Crimson Moon, is Type Moon. And for other types in the Nasuverse, fans have recently gotten a taste of Ort in the 7th Lost Belt, who for the record, is supposed to be a heavily weakened version compared to its proper history counterparts. So, just to clarify, types are ridiculous, and we still haven't seen their craziest states. Not to mention, Notes has its own lore never delved into other entries of Nasuverse, such as the future human species, Etherliners and Ares. Again, these are evolutions and subspecies of humanity seen in the far future, who Nasu also implied have some relevance to the Fairies of Lost Belt 6. Furthermore, we also received a lot of material books that have since expanded the world of Notes past the 6 chapters we've already seen, revealing more information such as other types including Ort and Ado Edom, the most powerful of the Etherliners. If you like the Nasuverse and haven't already looked into Notes, you definitely should go and do that if you haven't already, as despite the length, Notes is very important and it helped build the world of the Nasuverse just as much as each of the full-length works. Despite being forgotten nowadays, its relevance is still very much felt even in the most recent of Type Moon works like Fate Grand Order. Continuing on in the trend of post-apocalyptic Nasuverse works, however, the next one is quite the contrast from Notes while having a generally similar premise. Here is one of my favorite Type Moon pieces, Tsuki no Sango. Tsuki no Sango is a very interesting work. It's similar to Notes in that it's a short post-apocalyptic story, however, its differences lay entirely in the execution. Tsuki no Sango is a story about humanity dying out, however, this time it's not because of some threat, but because of themselves. People have advanced to the point of losing their own feelings and emotions, and without the drive to strive to greater heights, humanity's own apathy led to a sharp decline in population. In this world, a nameless princess lives on a lonely island, supposedly a descendant of people of the moon. Esteemed individuals travel from far and wide to take her hand in marriage, only to be turned down once she gives them an impossible task. As she goes out to swim one day, she meets a strange little man in a spacesuit, who claims that he is a merchant and is on the search for stories, a story which the girl might have. Tsuki no Sango, if it isn't obvious from the princess, is heavily inspired by the tale of Princess Kaguya, or the Bamboo Cutter, just with a slight Nasu twist. Rather than being a story that delves deep into the lore like Notes, Tsuki no Sango puts its lore implications in the background for fans to theorize about, and instead focuses more on the story at hand. This is a story mainly about writings and the importance of stories themselves, the emotions that they might carry, and the perspectives that they give to others. It's a really cool piece to read and think about once it's done, and it gives a very great perspective on how Nasu thinks as a writer. Tsuki no Sango's original format is a short novel. However, there is also a manga adaptation by Sasaki Shonen, the mangaka of Tsukihime's manga adaptation. This manga adds a lot of incredible visualization to the story and makes it far more immersive to read, while adding a few Easter eggs for fans to pick up. Out of these two versions, I would say the manga is the better overall, just due to those factors making it feel more like a complete story. However, both versions are definitely worth reading, and I really urge doing so because in my opinion, Tsuki no Sango might be Type Moon's most underappreciated work. It might not have any direct lore, but the world it shows is just so uniquely peaceful in the Nasuverse, and the story it tells is extremely thought-provoking for the short length, really displaying Nasu's strength as a writer even for the shorter tales. Another short story to discuss is Room of the April Witch, written by Hoshisora Mitio. This story was written as April Fool's content, but is ironically very much an actual piece. The story itself is only a couple of pages long, so it's an extremely quick read. It basically tells a story about a witch named April who is both unable to die and is also able to grant any wish asked of her. Due to her power, she confines herself in a small house, but on the April 1st of every year, she opens her door to visitors. People who enter meet April, and whatever happens depends on the wishes of the individual. She grants the wishes of all these people based on what they want from their heart. Some are kind, some are selfish, some are sympathetic, and some are downright monstrous. However, the wishes are always things that will come from the heart no matter what. When you go in, you just cannot lie. Japanese April Fools can sometimes be surprisingly high effort, and while Room of the April Witch is short and not to mention extremely vague, it's pretty interesting how we got a full story from what is essentially a joke holiday. If you want a good theory on what the story's meanings might be, I highly recommend checking out Transistor Glamor's blog post where they talk about how it might be a meta-commentary on April Fool's Day as a concept. You might also ask how it relates to the Nasuverse since it seems to be very short and doesn't have any relevant lore. But, in Strange Fake, Francesca Prelati mentions that she was killed once by an immortal undying witch. While vague, April fits that description. It could be a throwaway reference, but only Type Moon really knows. Finally, this last work I'd like to talk about is probably the most forgotten one and one of the biggest reasons I wanted to make this video. Mahoutsukai no Hako, not to be confused with Mahoutsukai no Yoru. It was originally made as a crossover drama CD series for Type Moon's now defunct phone site, with its main characters, Hibiki, Chikagi, and Mr. Cellphone, being the mascot of the sites while it was still active. Mahoutsukai no Hako was essentially a multimedia project that consisted of drama CDs that could be accessed on the phone site, along with a 4-koma manga called Hibichika Time by Omori Hayashi. Initial drama CDs were mainly crossovers in Ananerabe, but eventually Hako began introducing fully new characters into the crossover in the form of Hibiki and Chikagi's friends. Hibichika Time, on the other hand, was a manga that focused entirely on the new cast, unrelated to Ananerabe and the crossover aspect. Soon enough, it was revealed that all of these characters had their own story that took place prior to working at Ananerabe. With that, Hako's next drama CD, Starlit Marmalade, told the origin story of these characters, evolving Hako from a drama CD crossover into a fully fledged Type Moon story all unto itself. Jesus Christ, what a creative way to reveal a new work. Hako's real plot takes place during Hibiki and Chikagi's meeting during their high school years, told with both drama CD and manga interpretations, the latter being illustrated by Hisa Matsushiro. Both mediums tell the same story but have slight differences, so the link between them isn't fully clear. The gist of it, though, is that similar to Miyako from Hana no Miyako, Chikagi just wants to live a regular quiet semester. But she also happens to be the younger sister of a very popular person in the town, and also ends up meeting an energetic girl named Hibiki on her first day. Hibiki is basically the opposite of Chikagi, seemingly having unlimited energy and absurd amounts of physical strength. After a few days of attending class, Chikagi begins to realize that their campus might be holding a few secrets of its own, and that she might be trapped in something much bigger than she imagined. On base premise, Mahoutsukai no Hako seems to carry that non-serious tone that Hana no Miyako does, but soon afterwards, the story evolves into something much more like your conventional urban fantasy type moon work similar to Mahoyo. Most of Hako's story revolves around things that are loosely connected to Tsukihime. So remember Mr. Cell Phone, right? You know how Chikagi and Hibiki seem to know him very well? Well, Hako is essentially his story. Now, Mr. Phone, as I said before, Kaobak is a dead apostle ancestor who basically trapped himself inside one of his own labyrinths. As such, he's only able to communicate with the outside world through phones. As a result, it was pretty fitting to make him one of the phone site's mascots. While Hibiki and Chikagi both have direct links to him as a character, Chikagi's is more implied and has no official confirmation at the current time. However, Hibiki's connection is fully confirmed and extremely key to Kaobak's motives in the story. Unfortunately, after the second drama CD of Starlit Marmalade, Mahoutsukai no Hako hasn't seen any new updates for both the drama CD and manga iterations due to the cancellation of the phone site. Ever since that site went down, Mahoutsukai no Hako has not received any further updates. So until further notice, the project is essentially just cancelled at the current time. This hurts way more than any Mahoyo sequel for me. Cause while I would love to have more Mahoyo, at least the story we had at hand was properly completed. Hako still had a story to tell. There was still mysteries to solve and implications that could have connected it tighter with other Nasuverse works. Yet it all stopped before we were able to see most of that. It's genuinely pain. This story had so many mysteries, implied so many new plot threads, and introduced some really cool characters only to not show any of it. It's agony, and I refuse to let this entry die in obscurity, and it has been for the past few years. If there's one thing I want to do with this video, it's raise awareness of Mahoutsukai no Hako. This series had its own protagonist show up in Carnival Phantasm, yet not enough people asked the question, hey, where are these guys actually from? It's a shame, because this is a full Type Moon work that people just ignored, and I won't have it. If Hako is to die, I'd at least prefer to be remembered as part of the Nasuverse and a work with just as much potential as the other major works during their glory days. One day, if nothing else, I want this story to come back to us. Whether it just be more manga volumes, an anime, or a visual novel, I don't care. I just want to see more of it, and I want an ending. Please, Nasu, this hole in my heart needs to be filled. There is one more forgotten work that I do want to talk about, and it's Girls' Work. If you don't know what Girls' Work is, me neither. It was meant to be a new Type Moon work created by Meteor Hoshizora, who also made Fate Requiem, and was advertised to be one of the brand new upcoming Type Moon projects back in 2008. It was initially stated to be the next visual novel, but after some radio silence, plans eventually changed it to become an anime as part of Ufotable's collaborations with Type Moon. And that was the last we ever heard of it. No, seriously, this thing was announced alongside Fate Zero as an upcoming Type Moon anime, and while they said it was production in 2014, that was almost 10 years ago, and it is now the end of 2023. Nothing has come from it. What we have from the premise is vague, but it was advertised to be a story about a version of Shinjuku that had become one with Paris, and would have been a story where the location itself would have been the central focus of the story rather than any individual character. Despite that, it still had a protagonist, a girl named Asabe Shirube, an energetic girl with a sharp tongue that represents the vitality of Shinjuku as a city, along with two secondary characters in the form of Shirube's rival and Shirube's caretaker. For some reason, this work was just announced and disappeared into the nethers. This wasn't even cut short like Maho Hako. Girls' work just never made it past the initial announcements, and all we have of it is concept art. Mitio, who was supposed to write for it, has since gone to make other projects like Fate Requiem, only to just stall them as well. Meanwhile, on Ufotable's end, well, on a pure Type Moon scale, they've since made Unlimited Blade Works, Heaven's Feel, and are supposedly working on a Mihoyo anime, and yet none of them has talked about girls' work once. Why do Type Moon just not finish what they promise? At this rate, I don't even care if girls' work ends up being a mess. All I want it to do is just to come out in some form, and I swear to God, I will eat it up like my life depended on it. Come on, Ufotable, Mitio, anyone. Free her, please. So yeah, these are the forgotten works of the Nasuverse that not only just the fans, but maybe even Type Moon themselves have forgotten about. Now, this isn't every Type Moon work ever made, as there are still some that are not related to the Nasuverse, so I might do another video in the future talking about those. However, for now, as I've hopefully made it obvious, there are still a lot of corners of the franchise that many people haven't explored and don't discuss enough in current day. We are currently experiencing a time where Type Moon is more alive than ever with reviving stories, and with interest so high, I felt it was right to bring attention to these works that still need more love. So whether you just want a good story to enjoy, or build your understanding of this rich universe, there are still plenty of Nasuverse works that offer these very things and are worth taking a look at. Who knows? With Type Moon consistently making yearly content at this point, maybe we'll finally see some of these works come back to us in the upcoming years. I know that I would kill for Maho Hako to properly tell us its story and for girls' work to finally air. Either way, that's all for me for now. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and hopefully I'll see you all somewhere else on the internet again. Until then though, thank you very much for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you again.